Isaiah chapter 40, starting at verse 1. Comfort, comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem and proclaim to her that her hard service has been completed, that her sin has been paid for, that she has received the Lord's hand and she has received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins. A voice of one calling, in the wilderness, prepare the way for the Lord, make straight in the desert a highway for our God. Every valley shall be raised up, every mountain and hill made low. The rough ground shall become level, and the rugged places a plain. And the glory of the Lord will be revealed, and all the people will see it together, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken. A voice says, cry out, and I said, what shall I cry? All people are like grass, and all their faithfulness is like the flowers of the field. The grass withers and the flowers fall, because the breath of the Lord blows on them. Surely the people are grass. The grass withers and the flowers fall, but the word of our God endures forever. You who bring good news to Zion, go up on a high mountain. You who bring good news to Jerusalem, lift up your voice with a shout. Lift it up, do not be afraid. Say to the towns of Judah, here is your God. See, the sovereign Lord comes with power, and he rules with a mighty arm. See, his reward is with him, and his recompense accompanies him. He tends his flock like a shepherd. He gathers the lambs in his arms and carries them close to his heart. He gently leads those that have young. And then moving on to verse 27. Why do you complain, Jacob? Why do you say, Israel, my way is hidden from the Lord? My cause is disregarded by my gods. Do you not know? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He will not grow tired or weary, and his understanding no one can fathom. He gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. Even youths grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not faint.
I'm getting old. I'm 48. I know I don't look it. But last week I celebrated a birthday. And if you're in your 40s, you will remember the moment that Jurassic Park hit the screen. And the minute in Jurassic Park that is striking for many people is the moment when the man on the toilet gets eaten. But that doesn't get mentioned in many sermons, but it did right here, right now. It's quite funny unless you're the man. But here's a moment. There's a moment where a lovely blonde-haired girl is looking out the back of her Jeep. And she can see something that no one else can see. It's an almighty T-Rex that's coming towards the car that she's so scared about, she cannot even scream or utter. And the look of horror and terror that's etched upon her face is a great moment in the film, because we all know and anticipate what she can see. And there is a glass of water or two on the dashboard of the car that is tremoring because of the sheer weight and heft and might of the T-Rex as it thuds towards the Jeep. And what's going to happen next? I think it's on Netflix. You can find out this afternoon. But it's pretty scary, with wonderful music from John Williams. And it's a great moment in the film as the water ripples. And if you're into it, you can also Google, how did they do that? And I won't let you into the secret of how they did it. In Isaiah 40, it's a very, very famous part of the Bible, even before Handel got his hands on it, pun intended, for the Messiah, that at Christmas time and at Easter, you'll go to different places, Guildford, Royal Festival Hall, Royal Albert Hall, and the like, and you will hear these words sung, I think by a tenor, maybe a baritone, but sung and proclaimed with some majesty to it that you really wonder, where do those words come from? They come from Isaiah chapter 40. The reason it's so famous is because it's so dramatic. It's like you're looking out the back of a Cherokee and you see the greatness and grandeur of someone, but it's not a T-Rex. Isaiah is captivated, verse 1, with this dramatic, like as cymbals are being smashed together. Isaiah chapter 40, verse 1, he sees, or rather, he is shown something of the greatness of God. And he says, make way. Verse 1, sentence 1, make way. Make way. There's a voice. You can't see who it is right now. It's like the camera angle has not been revealed. But make way because someone or something great is coming. Someone so great is coming, it would make a car tremble, not just the water on the dashboard. It would make traffic stop. And I wonder who it is, because mountains are going to come down when the greatness of this person is revealed. Who's coming? It's the first question I want to ask. Who's coming? How are they coming? What must we do to respond? Okay? Who's coming? How are they coming? What must we do to respond? How do we receive him? Look at this first point, number 1. Who is coming? That's seen in sentence 3, sentence 4, verse 3, verse 4. It's a very famous piece of the Bible. A voice of one calling, look at it with me please. In the desert, prepare the way for the Lord. Make straight in the wilderness a highway. Every valley shall be raised up, every mountain and hill made low. Now we are about 2,700 years away from when this was written in 700 BC. And so this is a very old part of the Bible. But you go up to the British Museum, and what's described here is very, very familiar, in case we think the Bible is made up and fairy tales. This is historical. And what Isaiah is saying here is that this is an ancient practice that means a royal person is coming. This is very familiar. An emperor or a royal person, a king or a queen, is going to a part of a land or territory that they've never been to before. And when that happens, what do? You build a new boulevard. You build a new road. You build a new highway because it honors them because of their status. But also, all the others aren't good enough. So we're going to build a brilliant motorway. And they did it in China. When China got the Olympics in Beijing, they bulldozed loads of high-rise flats so that there would be a quicker route for the officials and the athletes from the Olympic airport to the Olympic stadium. And here we see in verse 3 and 4 the ancient practice of tearing down the old stuff to make way for a royal person. You go up to the British Museum and there's loads of wonderful displays from Babylon and Mesopotamia. And there was an ancient ruler called Nebo, not Nemo, that's the one in the water, Nebo, and he's going to part of his kingdom. And so what did they do for Nebo? Here's the inscription that you can go up and read in the British Museum. It says this, there's an announcement, there's a royal decree. Make his way good, renew his road, make straight his path. Hew him out, that's dig him out a track. In other words, the king is coming. So build a new road. Build a new boulevard. And it's symbolic of the king. The king is coming, so it's symbolic of his authority. This is not anybody who's coming. The king is coming. So no other road is good enough. And we're going to knock down anything that gets in the way. We're going to fill in the potholes, and then we're going to lay new tarmac on top. We're going to clean out the bins. We're going to paint the town as beautiful as we can do. It's going to be lit with LEDs down the side of the road. And he's going to be the first one who can use it. Why? Because it symbolizes the authority of the one who's coming. It symbolizes any resistance, anything in the way. We will deal with it to show the authority of the king, the royal person who's coming. Here's the second thing, though. Whether you're a king, whether you're a coach, a manager, a leader, when you have a leader, a king, a manager, a coach, and they rightfully exercise the authority that they have, it's like rain to a thirsty land. There's something that you can relax into your seat when you get a new manager at work and they're great at their job. They listen to your concerns and they care for you. They provide for what you need and they speak to the superiors on your behalf. Now here we have the king who's coming. Let's build a new road for him. But also there's a subtlety here that reveals the king's passions and the king's priorities. The king is going to come. He's going to come into the wilderness, and he's going to deal with the wilderness. He's going to heal the wilderness. It's uninhabitable, the wilderness, but the king will make it habitable because of who he is. So when you hear his voice, a king is coming. But that's not all Isaiah says. Verse 5 and 3 to 5 is important. It's not just a king who's coming. The king is coming. And Isaiah now gets into superlatives, gets into big language. It's like the water is bursting the banks of a dam. When human kings come, you build a bridge over chasms. You build a new highway. When this king comes, you fill in the chasms. Mountains are leveled. See the difference? Hills are made low. It's not potholes getting filled in. It's not just spanning a ravine. Mountains are leveled because the king, not a king, is coming. Mountains come down and valleys are filled in. And when we read this, Isaiah is keying into one of the deepest longings in the human heart. We want a king to come who's going to make every wrong right. We want a king to come who's going to deal with injustice and hardship. We want a king to come who's going to make the uninhabitable wilderness of the world habitable for us. We want a king who's going to come and deal with death and disease. We want a king who's going to come and is going to deal with war and make it stop, beginning in Ukraine. We want a king who's going to come and deal with strife, whether it's in our heart, our home, or on our screens. We want a king who's going to come and sort out the brokenness and the mess that we see in our communities and in our streets. And the whole world is like this. And Isaiah is saying, there is a king who will come and make the uninhabitable world habitable, who's going to make the desert into a garden, who's going to give us hope when we feel despair. And the reason why the king is coming into the wilderness is because it's been under new managers, and they've done an awful job, and the managers are you and me. We are the ones who said to King Jesus, we don't want to live under your rule. God, we want nothing to do with you. We ignore your existence, and we want to see how we get on living our own lives. And God in his justice and in his wisdom has said from the first chapter or so in the Bible, okay, you can have it your way. And what's happened is we've made the garden of God into a wilderness. And God is so kind. He says, I will send a king who will make everything that you've destroyed not just good again, but it will be better than it was in the first place. Notice verse 5. When the ultimate king comes, not just a king, the king. He says, verse 5, as he struggles for words, the glory of the Lord will be revealed, and all mankind will see it together. Notice where the king's coming from. He's coming from outside the world. He's come from outside the world to make everything that we've made a mess of whole again. Here's the king that we've been longing for. He has absolute authority. He brings complete healing to the wilderness, and he's coming. And you could say, if you're new to church, well, this sounds great, but I didn't come here for a fairy tale. In fact, you're just proving to me everything I thought about church. It's pie in the sky. Let me give you some evidence why we want this from your own heart and from my heart too. Don't you and I long for a world when the strong no longer eat the weak? Do you want a world like that? Where the strongest does not survive? When there's a place for the weak and the needy, even the lowly, and not ignored? Don't we long for a world like that? Don't we want a world where death and violence is unnatural rather than the common thing of life? Don't we long for a world when the human heart is able to be renewed and made whole again, where tears are a distant memory? Don't you want a world like that? And if you want a world like that, where does that longing come from? Where does that smile on your face when you watch the end of The Lion King come from? Where does that longing come from? Either we all need help because we're delusional, or there is hope that comes in our hearts and a longing from another world. And the Bible says there is another world that longing has been placed on your heart, and that God in his grace will send a king to make every wrong right. This world is a wilderness, it's desolate, it's blighted, but a king will come. And that's why we value the return of the king so greatly. And it's there in Disney, in almost every film. And it's there in The Lord of the Rings, and it's there in so many other plays and story and music as well. Isaiah says the king will come, and here he is. Get ready for his coming. That's the first point, the king's coming. Here's the second one. How is it possible? How is it possible that the king will come? How is it possible that the king will actually come back? Well, the Bible is a historical book, and there's lots of evidence for that. And before chapter 40 is 39 chapters, just in case you doubted I went to Bible college. And in the first 39 chapters, lest you think I've never read them before, and who has? Very few people. It's full of one word. Chapter 1 to chapter 39, it's full of judgment. God is judging his people because they've turned their back on him. And God's people, who are the Israelites, have detested God's word and his law, and they're living their own life. Everything that God said don't do, they're saying, we're going to do that. And so the first 39 chapters, God says, because of that, this will happen. It's there in one or two little sentences in Isaiah chapter 39, verse 6. He says, because of how you've behaved, I'm a God of justice. And so what's going to happen is exile. A foreign power will come in and they will take you off to a distant land for a limited amount of time, because that is what your rebellion deserves. It's there in chapter 39, verse 6. You're going to be taken away into captivity. You're going to go into exile. I'm going to take you by a foreign superpower to Babylon. And then you get chapter 40. That's like those cymbals that get smashed by an orchestra. It's like a trumpet sound. It's so sudden. It's almost as if it's a different writer, some people believe, which I think is wrong. I think it's the same writer. But there's a different tone and a different change, as if black to white or soft to loud. This is what it says after judgment and after justice. Listen to this, verse 1 of chapter 4, comfort is coming. Against 39 chapters of judgment and then justice, there is hope in the midst of decay. There's hope in the midst of justice. I want you to know, my people, that you will be comforted. Comfort is coming. Look at verse 1. No matter what happens, verse 1, you are still my people. No matter what you've done, you're still my people. Verse 1. Verse 2. Isaiah, I want you to say my word to my people. And this is my word to my people. Proclaim that her hard service has been completed, that her sin has been paid for, that she's received from the Lord's hand, doubled for all her sins. Now that is payment. It's not punishment. God is saying, I'm going to pay double, not just what your sins deserve. You're going to get what I want to give you, which is something of my righteousness and goodness. I'm going to pay double. That's my heart towards you, my people. I'm going to pay your debts, and then I'm going to give you so much more, because I'm a God of abundance and goodness. Look at verse 9, verse 10, verse 11. There's an extraordinary picture of God's heart. Verse 10, he's like a warrior who comes with power. The Bible says his outstretched arm is a picture of strength. It's very important. And then how does God use his power? As we said to the young people, verse 11, he uses his power not to harm, but to heal and to protect rather than to persecute. He gathers the lambs in his arms and carries them close to his heart. That's the God of the Bible. That's the God of Christianity. And he gently leads those who have young. Here's the God of the Bible who has all power, all authority, and he uses it not against us, he uses it for us. You go to verse 12 and following, he says he owns the mountains, he owns the waters. He has ultimate knowledge. And rather than using that against us, he uses it for us. God does not use power, as we thought last week, in the way that we would. He uses it for our good. And what do you give someone who has everything? You know those articles that come up in the first week of December, normally sponsored by Amazon every year? What do you give to the person in your life who has everything? Well, what do you give the God of the Bible who owns everything? Because notice it says, verse 10, his reward is with him. He's not talking about our reward. He's not talking about my reward. God is talking about his reward. What do you give to the God who has everything? Who carries his sheep in his arms, who has all authority and power? God is talking about his own reward. He's talking about something that is such a passionate treasure to him. He says, this is what I prize most in all the world. Now, what could that be? The Bible says it's his people. He rejoices over his people with singing. He values his people so much, they're like the most precious jewel to him. The warrior of Israel has become the shepherd of his people, the God who's absolutely just, who will deal with all injustice and all evil. He looks at us, knowing our weaknesses, knowing our frailty, and he says, you are the thing, you are the people that I prize most in the whole cosmos. Out of all the earth, you are my treasured possession. Or to quote Little Brown Hare, I love you to the moon and back. And as we thought last week, I know what you've done, and I love you in spite of yourself. That's the God who knows all things. And he says, I treasure you more than all the mountains, more than all the cosmoses, and more than the depths of the sea. I know who you are, I know what you've done, and I love you. I choose to love you. That's how God uses his almighty power. And you should be asking, how could that be? That's too good to be true. Where do you see the power of God and the tenderness of God coming together? Here, on a very dark night in a garden. There's a man called Peter, who was one of Jesus' closest friends, and he drew a sword to defend Jesus because he thought he needed defending. Peter had a very limited idea of power. Jesus said, don't you know I could call to my Father and he would send down a military legion of angels and he would protect me? Nothing untoward can happen to me unless God wills it. And I want to do the will of my Father. Put your sword away. Jesus is saying, I have enough strength to be weak. That's the sign of strength. I have enough majesty to be meek. And I'm choosing to lay my life down for my sheep. How in the world could God pay double for my sins? Verse 2, he says, I will give double payment for everything you've done wrong. I will pay the debt you owe to bring you back to zero, and then I will abundantly give you everything that Christ has earned that you don't deserve is now yours in him by faith. It's the gospel in Isaiah chapter 40, verse 2. I see you as you are, and that you may have a very low view of yourself, but to me, because of Christ, God says, you are my most treasured possession. It's the gospel right here. He sees you as a jewel. Because of his hard work, we can rest, and he rejoices over us. How do you respond to that? Third point. How do you respond to this king who came to seek and to save the lost? He came to die upon a cross 2,000 years ago. It's a very famous term in verse 31. Those who wait on the Lord will renew their strength. How do you treat God as king? How would you get ready for the king if he called you to Buckingham Palace? How do you practice the kingship of God, if you want to use that sort of term? You need to wait on him. You need to wait on him. Now that is a pregnant phrase. Here's 3 words to unpack that. To wait on the Lord means obey. You ever seen ladies in waiting or royal equerries and that kind of stuff? It's always a hard word to say. You're not treating the God of the Bible as king unless you say these words, not my will, but yours be done. Unless you obey, you give 100% allegiance to the king, you're not treating him as king. You're not waiting upon him. You're not serving him. Remember verse 3, 4, 5? Every mountain will be brought down. Every valley will be filled in. Nothing will be held back. Nothing is too much because the king is coming. Elizabeth Elliot was a remarkable Christian lady who died a few years back. She used to say this little phrase, the hardest thing to give is in. The hardest thing to give is in. It's a profound statement. It's easy to give this, it's easy to give that, but the hardest thing to give for all of us is in. to submit to someone, to say, not my will, but yours. That's the first thing it means to wait upon the Lord, to give God the right to determine how to live your life. It's the right he's always had, but we want to snatch it back to ourselves. So the first thing it means to wait upon the Lord, to respond to the greatness of God, is to say, not my will, but yours, and to give in to the King of the whole world. It makes sense. Here's the second thing it means to relax. It needs to relax. If the King has come, and if the King is who he's described to be in Isaiah chapter 40, it means not my will, but yours. It also means not my schedule. Not my schedule, but yours. This is how I think my life should go. I don't want to accept the instructions for my life from my Maker, but I've given up trying to live my life. I've given up trying to order my priorities. I accept your order. I accept your ordering of my life. I accept the fact that you know what's best, and I'm willing to humble myself under your hand. Are you a worrier? Don't put your hand up. Are you a worrier here this morning? Do you find anxiety a really close, kind of a familiar bedfellow? Worry, I think, comes from a resistance to the kingship of Jesus. We have trust issues, and it's often seen in worry and anxiety. I don't know if I can trust God with my life. And it's a lifelong battle to say again and again, not my will, but yours. It's a daily struggle. Worry, anxiety, fear always mean this: if I was in charge of my life, it would be better than if you're in charge of my life. I don't know if you've got this, God. I think I could do a better job. I don't see you as coming through for me. But when you see Jesus as who he is, when you see the God of the Bible, when you wait upon the Lord, you say, not my will, but yours. Not my schedule, but yours. And then you can relax, because God has always got this. His ways may be confusing to us. They may be perplexing. They may be not according to our timing. They may cause us to cry deep into the night. But God has always got this. And his ways are higher than ours. Thirdly, quickly, wait means expect. This word wait, sometimes it's translated hope. Those who hope in the Lord, those who hope on the Lord. Wait means if it's really true that God is coming, if it's really true that the King is coming into the wilderness to make everything wrong right, you're not treating him as king unless you have very high expectations about what he will do because of who he is. If the King is coming, if he's come once in Jesus, if he will return in Jesus to make everything wrong right, then I'm very optimistic about the future, regardless who's in control at Westminster. You see, God is perfect. God is the creator of all things. He's the source of every good thing. He lacks nothing. He cannot be improved upon by adding anything to him, and he will be diminished if you can take anything away from him. So how can God suffer? How can God suffer if he's the source of all good things and if he lacks nothing? If, verse 28, he will not grow tired and he will not grow weary. God is never depleted. He never needs to take his foot off the pedal of history, or he never needs to put his feet up. Because if something that God made could take something from him, if he could suffer, it would diminish him. If he could suffer, it would take something from him. It has a power over him. And the Bible shows God has emotions, but he does not have passions. Passions are internal. Passions are something that an uncontrolled response to an external event. God has emotions. He's filled with compassion. He weeps. He's moved towards the brokenhearted and the needy. But passions are an uncontrolled response to something that happens on the outside of us. It's an expression of longing and of heartache to do something that we don't have control over. And so something outside is controlling us. But compassion is from the inside, where God is moved because of his character. It's an expression of his internal and his eternal being. It's not forced by something from the outside, because nothing on the outside affects his character. He's not changed. So the compassion of God is seen, here's the quote, The compassion of God is seen not in suffering, maybe it's not there. So compassion of God is seen not in his suffering in solidarity with humankind, someone said, but the compassion of God is seen in his ability to alleviate the cause of human suffering, sin. God is not reactionary. It's from God's very heart and nature that he wants to solve the problem of sin because of who he is, says Thomas Weinhardy. The compassion of God is seen not in his suffering in solidarity with humankind, but in his ability to alleviate the cause of human suffering. God is not on the back foot. He's not responsive. He wants to deal with the problem of human suffering because of who he is. He has compassion, he has emotions, not passions. But let's look at the last sentence to close. Notice 4 times in the last few sentences, it says weary. Verse 28, he will not grow tired and weary. Verse 29, he gives strength to the weary. Verse 30, even youths grow tired and weary. And then verse 31, those who hope in the Lord, they will run and not grow weary. Here's the king who's supremely blessed and happy. But the passage doesn't end as we think it might. Shouldn't it be the other way around? Shouldn't it be they will walk and not faint? They will run and not be weary. They will soar. That's got a better rhythm to it. We're soaring at the end on the upbeat, end on the high note, but it's the other way around. It's kind of an anticlimax. They'll soar, they'll run, they'll walk. Do you know why? Because the point is walking. We will soar sometimes in our lives. We'll have really long periods of joy and happiness. But the point in the Christian life is endurance. The point is walking. Sometimes you'll soar, but you don't always soar. But you can always walk. Treat him as the king. You will be able to walk all the time. You won't always soar, but you'll always be able to walk. Because that's the point of the Christian life.